Hello, my name is Ronan O'Neill, and welcome to the Zurich offices in Blackrock, County Dublin, where today we're going to be talking about auto-enrolment. The government has just confirmed that the launch date of auto-enrolment will be the 1st of January 2026, which is a little over 6 months away. So the countdown clock is very much ticking, and now is the time that you should be preparing yourself, your business, and importantly your employees for the introduction of auto-enrolment. There's an admin and a HR concern for employers. Certainly we've been speaking to lots of employers around the country. What, from a HR perspective, do employers have to do to prepare their business for the introduction of auto-enrolment, which is, as I say, just over 6 months away?
Yeah, just around the corner.
Yeah.
Like the very first thing they need to do is look at their demographic. So what exactly are their employees, so their age bracket, what they currently have in situ in relation to what type of pension scheme they actually have, and what employees will actually fall within the category of having to join the auto-enrolment scheme. That's the very first thing that you need to do, because you need to understand exactly what your employees are like and what they will need and what that all looks like. The second thing you need to look at then is in relation to your documentation. So your contracts of employment, so they'll all have to be updated to include the fact that you're now going to be auto-enrolled in your pension when you join, because it'll be a deduction from salary. Then look at policies, procedures, and how that will all work. And obviously has a knock-on effect on other things that people may not think about. So people on probation periods, people going on sick leave, people taking a career break. So how are all of those things actually going to impact on their employees? So there's quite a lot of things to look at that people can prepare for now.
Yeah.
Before we hit the D-Day of 1st January.
Yeah. So in terms of reviewing your documentation, like, let's say you're an employer, you've got 50 people working for your business, and who's responsible for doing that within the business?
Yeah, so it's normally the employer, so either the owner of the business, the HR department, whoever looks after that kind of admin side of things. Most companies may have someone who looks after HR and looks after payroll. It may fall down to them. So you really need to look at that and say, okay, well, where do we need to start? What do we need to look at? So the responsibility is ultimately the owner of the business. They have the ultimate responsibility, and then they'll cascade that down to others to get that documentation updated.
What if the employees turn around and say, no, we don't want you to change our contracts for employment?
Like, I suppose there's two things. You've got your employees that are there already, and then you have your employees that are coming on board. So, excuse me, that are coming on board. So the ones coming on board, it's probably pretty straightforward. You'll update your contracts, update your offer letters, and it'll all be in situ from the minute they start. The current employees that they may get a little bit of resistance from, unfortunately, it's a little bit out of the employee's hand. It's going to be a legal obligation. So once it becomes a legal obligation, the employer has to put it in situ. So they will just issue like a memo or an addendum out to their contracts to say, this is now what we're doing, and this is effective from X, Y, and Z date. Then you'll have to look and say, okay, we have the 6-month opt-in, opt-out. So the people that are currently working there at the moment will obviously opt in, and some of them may decide to opt out. And I think that's where your administration nightmare is going to come. Yeah. So you'll need somewhere to record that. So what system are you using to say, you know, X, Y, and Z are in it now, but they want to opt out in 6 months, and then in 2 years' time, you have to make sure that they're back in again. So that can be a real challenge. So putting those preparation in place now should make those things a little bit easier going forward.
Okay. And from your own perspective, Peninsula, what are you doing to help companies at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment, we obviously have our advice line. So people are ringing in, asking questions, what it's going to look like, when they need to start preparing. So we can give them all the advice and direction on that one. And the other one is then around the documentation. So what exactly is the wording that they need to put into that documentation, and how that's going to look. So we're going to update all of our client documentation. We'll send that all out to them, so they'll have that all done for them. The other part of it is in relation to our software at Bright. They will be able to record that on the system. So when your employee is set up, you'll be able to say whether they're in the pension scheme, whether they're opting out of it, and it'll have a trigger then to be able to show when they need to opt back in again.
Okay. It feels like communication to employees is going to be essential with this, and it's difficult to, if you're not a comms expert, to pull all this together. Like, do you have any advice to people in relation?
Yeah, like I think prepare now. I think, you know, prepare is definitely the main thing, so that you have a plan in place, I suppose, for how you're going to roll it out. Like, I mean, it's obviously been quite publicised at the moment. We've seen it in the news quite recently. So I'm sure most people have a fairly good idea that this is coming down the line. So what the employers need to do is put a communication plan in place. So the first step is really to let their employees know that they're actually looking at it, that they're evaluating how it's going to work within their own business, and then keeping them up to date with the progress that they're making. And they can do that various different ways, like between email, like companies now use email, WhatsApp, text messages, internal systems, all of those type of way, newsletters, memos. So making sure that that's being kept up to date, and I suppose becomes a norm.
Yeah.
That's frequent. I think the smaller amount of information that you can do at each step, it's much easier, and it just becomes part of the everyday business. That normally makes things much easier.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully people are able to buy into that. And I know you say people are aware of it and there's a bit more coverage, but the government hasn't fully ramped up the coverage yet. So once they start to do that, and once we get a bit more concrete timelines, I think that's when it'll really kick in. You mentioned payroll. One of the challenges is payroll providers and having them geared up for auto enrolment. Do you have any insights on that, and how are payroll providers doing at the moment?
Not at the moment, but I think the fact that it's moved to January is probably much simpler. Obviously, January is the beginning of the tax year, and what you will normally see is that payroll providers will start the year off afresh. So it gives them a really good opportunity to get their systems developed to allow for all of those deductions to happen. Originally there was talk earlier on the year that was going to be September, which is a little bit unusual in the middle of a tax year to start doing something. So from what we're hearing is payroll providers are looking at how they're going to develop their systems to do it. And really payroll is key to this, because it's really going to be what's going to drive all of the deductions and all of the administration around it. So it's important that employers are touching base with their own payroll providers, checking in with them, see what stage they're actually at with it, and going back to that communication piece. From an employee payroll perspective, they're probably waiting on a little bit of information as well from the government on what that's going to look like, so they can start developing that software that's going to be able to help it. But from an employer's perspective, they should be keeping in touch with their payroll provider and making sure that the system that they're currently using will be able to facilitate the auto enrolment when it comes into place in January.
Sounds like we're going to have a busy summer, or employers are going to have a busy summer as they prepare for this and gear up for this. Maura, I just want to come back to you again. To be fully AE ready, and you mentioned this earlier in relation to contracts of employment, what do employers need to do to their contracts of employment, both for new people and existing people?
Right. So taking the new people, so they will need to now add a clause in their contracts that basically says, with effect from X, Y and Z date, you will be auto-enrolled within our pension scheme and there'll be a deduction made from your payroll. Pretty straightforward for anybody who's new, but those documentation needs to be updated. For current employees, they will need to send them out like what you'd call an addendum to their contract to ultimately say that from the 1st of January, the auto enrolment is coming into situ. And with that, it will mean that their payroll will be impacted and that there will be a deduction of X, Y and Z. And of course, that the employer will be making X amount of contribution as well. So that will need to be communicated in writing to all employees so that they're fully aware on the amendments to their contracts of employment.
Okay. And you might not know the answer to this one, but if you were amending contracts of employment for new employees to say that you are going to be immediately auto-enrolled and join the auto-enrollment pension scheme, could you make a similar amendment to say that you're going to join the private pension scheme or the pension scheme, your company pension scheme, as opposed to the auto-enrollment scheme?
Yeah, I think ultimately the auto-enrollment piece is the piece that's down in legislation that all employees need to join. So that's a legal obligation, you have to do it. As a business, you may believe that another pension scheme is actually more beneficial for the employees, but it does leave you a little bit more open that the employee may object to that. And they may not want to go into it for whatever reason. They may have their own external pension scheme or something like that, and they want to continue on with them. That actually doesn't meet the criteria of it. So if their employee is saying, I don't want to join the pension scheme that the employer wants me to join, they can refuse. But with the auto enrolment, they can't refuse unless they follow the process in relation to the opt-out.
That's a really good point, and thanks for clarifying that. Niall, I want to bring you in actually. I've heard you mention different pension categories in the past. What do we mean by pension categories, and how do they apply?
So it's up to the prerogative of the employer to, put the rules in place for the various employees. All the employees might have the same rule. For instance, they might want to treat senior executives, for instance, differently. So we have what's known as pension categories within pension schemes to cater for that. So what we're seeing is, and just following on from Moira's point there, is particularly for new employees going post the introduction of auto-enrolment, a lot of larger employers in particular are looking at making their pension scheme compulsory and immediate membership from day one, so that auto-enrolment doesn't come into the criteria of that employee. So that is something that can be done, as Moira alluded to, but where we're a little bit stuck for employers is where, as Moira said, the existing employees, it's their choice. They have to give their consent to join the pension scheme. So it's very important that they get that consent, otherwise they'll go into auto-enrolment. But the pension categories are there to sort of bespoke the scheme to the employer's needs and the employees that they have.
So to give a little bit more flexibility.
Absolutely.
And Maura talked a little bit about communication. And I know I've heard you talk about this, education, informing employees, going to be key. And you quoted examples from other companies or other countries and how they do it. Explain to me what you mean by educating employees.
It is for that cohort enrollment of the non-members of existing arrangements. They're going to have to be educated, say, and give them the sort of material to make it their own decision about whether they go into auto-enrolment or whether they go into their existing arrangement. And again, goes back to some points, maybe if they're high-rate taxpayers, once they realise that the benefits that they get from their own contributions will be far higher in their own existing arrangements, then they might want to choose that. Or they may decide, no, I'm going to just go into auto-enrolment for whatever reason. But I think there's a very small window between now and hopefully the 1st of January for that education piece to happen. So employers should be consulting with their financial advisors, their pension providers, their employee benefit consultants to get that advice piece to these employees as soon as possible to allow them time to make the appropriate decision for them.
Yeah, it's probably likely that we're going to see a lot of younger people end up in auto-enrolment, and then maybe want to, when they start thinking about the retirement plans, they may go, oh, I should be in a different pension scheme. What will someone's options be 5-6 years down the line if they've joined AE and then realise, no, I actually want to join the private pension scheme through the company?
Again, this goes back to the point of flexibility. AE lacks that flexibility. It's been set up under separate legislation, the National Auto-Enrolment Retirement Savings Act, and that was introduced in summer last year. So this moment in time, there's no transferability. So you can't transfer your pot of money from AE across to your occupation pension scheme or your PRSA, which is rather unfortunate. Hopefully we'll see developments on that as the system matures. So what you're going to have is you're going to have an employee with an individual pot. You're going to hear that term referred to a lot. So the individual pot will be from whatever they build up in auto-enrolment through various employments. So if they're moving, say, I used the barman example, if someone's moving from bar A to bar B, they keep that same account with auto-enrolment, but it's just the pay into it will change. However, if they move to somewhere that has an occupation pension scheme, it will be kept very, very separate until any changes in legislation down the line that may allow transferability.
Okay. Maura, I want to bring you back in if you don't mind. And again, it's probably a question in relation to contracts. Probationary period. Like most employers will have a probationary period for new staff. I think in Zurich it's 6 months, and that's the norm. Probationary periods won't apply though to AE. How do employers square that, or what will they need to do in order to square that with new joiners?
Yeah, so I mean, probation periods are actually a legal requirement now. Over the last 2 years, it's just come into play. Before that, probation periods weren't actually a legal requirement, even though most employers did it. But the pension auto-enrolment becomes obviously a requirement from day one. So regardless of whether or not an employee is in probation period or out of a probation period, they'll still need to join the auto-enrolment scheme, or if they've chosen to go with the company scheme by the contract. So it doesn't make that much of a difference about the probation period, to be honest with you. Ultimately, they have to join one way or another.
They have to join one.
Just add on to that point, because this is very unusual to what the existing arrangements would, employers being used to in existing arrangements. the probationary period would match the eligibility period in a pension scheme, and traditionally, as I say, would be 6 months. So the employee that joins wouldn't be allowed to join the pension scheme until after that 6 month period. So now this is going to be a new way of thinking, because for that 6 months, if the employee makes no changes whatsoever, for the first 6 months, that employee will be in auto-enrolment. And then they may be, whether it be compulsory or with their consent, go into the occupational pension scheme.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's in anyone's interests. And that's why employers are looking, particularly for new joiners, in putting in this immediate membership, whether the employee is in a probation period or not.
Okay. Niall, I've heard you mention before vesting periods. What do you mean by vesting periods?
So vesting period is a period of time before the employee is entitled to preserve benefit, which is basically the employer contributions that the employer has made on their behalf. This is either immediate or 2 year in time period. So what we've seen is now employers talking to us about, how they can have protection in the costs that they contribute to the employees' benefits. And the only protection they actually have is through a vesting period. So what we're seeing is, again, going back to the point about new joiners, we're seeing this category being set up that is compulsory, immediate, but also with a 2 year vesting period. So it sort of gives the employer protection of some of their contributions, maybe for that probation period, for instance. That if the employee doesn't pass their probation period and they leave, they draw down the benefits, then the employer is entitled to a refund of their contributions. So it's proving to be a lot more popular and a lot more, say, prioritised in discussions that we're having with employers than it would have been previously.
Okay. One thing we haven't spoken about is the sort of the standards comparing AE to an occupational pension scheme. And I know you've touched on various elements, but AE is going to be gradually introduced with different contribution limits for years 1 to 3 and then 4 to 7. Would you just give us a quick overview of what they are?
Yeah, so it's starting out at 1.5% for the employer, as I say, up to that ceiling of 80,000. And that's from years 1 to 3, and that's system wide. That isn't just per employee. So the system increases every 3 years. It'll go up by 1.5%. Up to the year 10, then finally it'll be at 6 and 6 and 2 with an aggregate contribution of 14%. So that's 6% employer, 6% employee, and 2% from the state. But that's going to take a while. We don't know if there's going to be any speed bumps in the way. Certainly there have been in other jurisdictions. So what that is likely to ensure is that if people are serious about their providing for their retirement benefits, auto-enrolment isn't the way to go. They need to go to see a higher standard, which is, usually either 3 and 3 or 5 and 5, if not more, in normal occupational pension schemes are PRSAs. So that's basically the standards that they have to compare against first and foremost. The standards will be introduced in regards auto-enrolment on occupational pension scheme before year 7. That's the third increase. And how that standard is going to be matched is best pot wins. So is the employee better off in auto-enrolment or are they better off staying in their existing pension arrangements? We don't know how that's going to transpire, to be quite honest. In fact, I suggest that we ask that question of the department because I'm very interested to know how that will come about. So I think it's important to note for employers' perspective, they don't have to match those contributions at the outset if they want to, put something in their own arrangements. In fact, any contribution once through payroll will suffice. But I think they have to have a decision whether they're serious about those retirement benefits, and then they're going to obviously have to take action no matter what the situation is by year 7.
Yeah, I think a majority of the pension schemes that would be with Zurich would be on probably a 5 and 5 basis. So 5% contribution from the employer, 5% contribution from the employees.
Yes.
And that seems to be the norm. It's interesting you say that at the year 10, AE is going to move to 6% and 6%. Do you think that will become the norm for occupational pension schemes as well?
I think so. And I think, if you have a very sort of long-term viewpoint, particularly in finance as an employer, you'd be looking at that in due course. However, I would say, that is an objective rather than, it can get distorted by, the state of the economy, et cetera, et cetera. As I said, like the Australian superannuation system, which is regarded as one of the best in the world, that took 25 years to get to maturity. Things tend to get in the way. So we'll wait and see in that respect.
But look, Moira, thanks very much. Niall, thank you very much. Hope you found this session useful. We will be looking to do more as we come closer to auto enrolment. As I say, it's only 7 or 8 months away. But thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you found this useful. Thank you.